The Jets are in Cleveland this Sunday for a game against the Browns. How can the Jets come away with a victory? We'll discuss today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, September 16th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. We're free, and we're available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. You'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today, our episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, the Jets are in Cleveland this weekend. They will play the Browns. 1 o'clock is the scheduled kickoff time. That's 1 o'clock Eastern from Cleveland. Jets and Browns have played each other frequently in recent years. In 2016, the Jets went out to Cleveland late October, won a game. 2017, the Jets went to Cleveland early part of the season. It was a game the Browns should have won. That was the year the Browns went 0-16, and the Browns outgained the Jets by like 200 yards in that game, but DeShone Kizer kept turning the ball over, so the Jets came away with the victory. 1 year later, 2018, Jets go out week 3, Thursday Night Football, Sam Darnold's rookie season, Baker Mayfield's first real action in the NFL, replacing Tyrod Taylor, a disaster Jets loss. Same could be said 2019, week 2, Monday Night Football, Sam Darnold has mono. Trevor Siemian starts the game for the Jets, leaves with a season-ending injury. Luke Falk comes in. The Jets get crushed. 2020, late season. Browns come to the Meadowlands, week 16 action, and they have a COVID outbreak in their receiver room. So the Browns play this game with almost none of their regular receivers, and the Jets pull out their second and final victory of 2020. Last year, they did not meet, but these teams have been meeting practically every year. And they meet again Sunday in Cleveland. Again, it's week 2 action. And today we're going to talk about what the Jets need to do to win this game. And I see this game going down one specific path. Now, in a one-game scenario, you could always run into like somebody having a career game. You could run into like Mike White throwing for 405 yards against the Bengals and then never succeeding again. All of his other opportunities that season. So you never really know, but when I break these games down, I try and figure out if you played these teams 100 times, what would happen most of the time? You could always have some outlier performance, but what would happen if you played 100 times, like 60 out of 100? So that's when I break these games down, that's kind of my mindset. And it sounds like it will be Joe Flacco for the Jets at quarterback for a second straight weekend, much to the chagrin of the Jets fan base. The news broke the other day that Flacco's starting this game. Now, we know Zach Wilson's out this week, and he's out at least next week. The question was whether the Jets would make a change to Mike White, and I understand the frustration. Robert Saleh is getting a lot of grief from the fan base over this, but I don't think that's entirely fair. If you want to be mad at somebody, you should be mad at Joe Douglas, because Saleh's been given a bunch of terrible options. He's got Joe Flacco, he's got Mike White. I guess you could say he's got Chris Streveler, although I don't think Chris Streveler's going to be starting a game at quarterback anytime soon. Flacco was so bad last week that I think you could justify making a change just for the sake of making a change. But I think this is going to be a very low-scoring game. I think this is going to be a game where avoiding mistakes is going to be important on offense. And I think it's clear that Flacco's the less mistake-prone of the two quarterbacks. Flacco may not be able to produce anything. And I'm talking about any sort of big plays. But I think if you look, Mike White was very turnover-prone last year. He was prone to giving the ball away. And this could be the kind of game, it could be like a throwback game, the type of game where it's not so much about who makes the big play, it could be who avoids the big mistake. And that could be where Joe Flacco comes in. And with that in mind, to me, one of the key matchups, and it's not really a one-on-one matchup, but it's a lot of this game I think is going to be determined by which of the running back duos performs better. And of course, a lot of this will come back to the offensive line play, but the Browns have a very good running back duo in Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. And the Jets have a running back duo that, let's say, has a lot of potential in Michael Carter and Breece Hall. And Carter played very well last weekend. I think if you're watching that game, Carter was one of the best Jets on the field. Hall was off to a bit of a slow start, which I'm not entirely surprised by. I was expecting this season to kind of begin with Carter being the lead guy. And I feel like over the course of the season, I'm expecting Hall to really begin to emerge, show why the Jets traded up for him in the second round of this year's draft, and eventually take over the lead role, as we move later into the season. But the run game is going to be important in this one because you have two quarterbacks. It's not just Joe Flacco. I mean, we've heard from Jeff and Garrett yesterday in our crossover show. Jacoby Brissett will be starting this game at quarterback for the Browns, and he had his own issues pushing the ball down the field. And that means this is going to be a very physical game. I think you're going to see lots of inside runs. It's going to be I don't know if 3 yards in a cloud of dust is the right term in this day and age, but I think you're going to see these teams try and run the ball a lot because, first of all, when you can't make big plays in the passing game, I think that leads play callers to believe they cannot get into third and long situations, and that's especially going to be true with the Jets in this game. Now, I'm a big believer. I don't love this mindset because, to me, the best way to succeed on third down is to never get into third down, is to make big plays. But I don't know whether this Jets offense can make a lot of big plays through the passing game. And you definitely don't want to get into like 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9 with the extremely immobile Joe Flacco back there and Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney rushing off the edges against George Fant and Max Mitchell. And the injury to Dwayne Brown, I think in some ways was a double whammy because last year George Fant had a good year, but the Jets were also sending some extra help his way. So when Dwayne Brown goes down, now Max Mitchell's in the starting lineup. So not only have you downgraded from Brown to Mitchell, but that help that you were sending Fant kind of has to be sent to Mitchell now. And you saw there was a lot of struggle from the tackle position last week. Fant's struggles were obvious. Max Mitchell, as I was watching the game, I felt like he must have been playing pretty well because I really did not notice him. I feel like that was kind of the consensus because I had the same view. I was in real time. I felt like Max Mitchell was playing okay, and then I watched it over, and I thought he had a really rough time, which I'm not blaming Max Mitchell for. He's not supposed to be playing this year. In fact, the Jets drafted him with the idea he'd be the backup, and then they signed Dwayne Brown just to prevent him from needing to step into the starting lineup. So I don't want to be too hard on Max Mitchell, but I don't think he's ready. If he's going to be a good player for the Jets, it did not look last week like he was ready to be a good player immediately, and this means running the ball effectively is going to be important, and stopping the run is going to be important. And last week, the Jets surprised me. I felt like going into that matchup against Baltimore that they were going to be in some trouble against the Baltimore offense. Now, they were in trouble in a different way, but all in all, they played pretty well. They held the Ravens to 63 yards. It was the lowest total a Lamar Jackson quarterbacked team in Baltimore has ever been held to. I felt like the defensive line did its job. A defensive line that's really built around getting after the passer. Robert Saleh has indicated if you're just a pure run stop, or if you're a big space-eating defensive tackle, he doesn't really want you. He wants guys who are well-rounded, guys who can do a little bit of everything, but guys who especially can get up the field. And they rotate guys in and out. They have guys going in, guys going out. It's almost like a hockey team making a line change at times. And I felt like they did a good job controlling the trenches. I felt like with a few hiccups, the linebackers, which have been a big concern this season, kind of held their own. And of course, you have Jordan Whitehead and Robert Saleh. He's a coach. The rest of as a whole in the NFL right now, you're seeing more and more two deep safety looks. Robert Saleh last year was kind of going against that trend. He was continuing to stick that extra safety in the box, going with one deep safety. And Jordan Whitehead made some plays early in the game. He looked really good early in the game. Not so much later in the game. We'll discuss that a little bit later on the show, but early in the game, Jordan Whitehead was making plays near the line. Quan Alexander looked pretty good. So the Jets are going to need that kind of run defense this week. And it's a different challenge. So much of playing Baltimore is kind of keeping Lamar Jackson under control, making sure he doesn't have any game-breaking runs. And really, aside from one spectacular third down scramble, they did a good job holding Lamar in check. This is going to be a more conventional rushing attack where you're just going after these two backs. You have the offensive line in front of them. And it's going to be a different challenge from the standpoint that Baltimore was missing some pieces last week. Baltimore was down to its number 3 tackle by the end of the game. They started their backup left tackle. He got injured during the game. They were down to their number 3 tackle by the end of the game. So, and then Baltimore also had some injuries at the running back position. So it's going to be a little bit different this week. It's going to be, I think, a challenge that's more conventional, but the Jets struggled quite a bit against the conventional run game last year. And a lot of this is going to come down to the battle of the run game because it's not going to be a big play game. It's not going to be a game with a lot of big plays. It's going to be the type of game where it's based on field position. Because when you're building your game plan around the run, you're kind of taking the big play off the table for the most part. You're essentially trying to move the chains a little bit, flip field position, eventually gain the upper hand in a punting battle, and then maybe with a short field you take advantage and get points, because I think points will be at a premium in this game. However, just because I'm not expecting many big plays, that does not mean we can expect no big plays. I think that there will be some big plays in this game. I think they could end up making a big difference, and I'll discuss what I mean ahead here on this Friday episode of Locked On Jets. This is the first Jets road game of the 2022 season. Maybe you're heading to Cleveland, or maybe you're heading on another road trip this year. Well, I want to tell you about Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, Canada, or the UK. You can book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. You can get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. You can find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B. You can test drive that new electric vehicle you've always had your eye on to see how it fits in your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you, and every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms and conditions and exclusions apply. Ditch boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. We're talking about Jets-Browns on Sunday, and I'm explaining how I think this game's going to play out and what the Jets need to do to win. Now, in the last segment, I ended it by saying I don't think there are going to be a lot of big plays in this game. However, I do think there are going to be big plays. And when big plays are at a minimum, one big play can change everything. And I look at this Jets roster right now with Joe Flacco at quarterback, and I do see some opportunities. Not so much from Flacco, but from Mike LaFleur, because last year Mike LaFleur was really good at coming up with innovative, I don't know if innovative is the right word, but creative play designs. He kind of schemed some things up to work around his lack of talent last year. And the Jets do have guys who can make plays, especially with the ball in space. Now, part of that's going to be the running back position. The Jets will need, as I mentioned, a big game out of Hall, a big game out of Carter. Maybe this is the game Breece Hall really steps up. Maybe this is the game where he shows that home run speed and takes one to the house from 70 yards out. But there are other guys in the receiving game where the Jets are going to be able to scheme touches for them. And I'm thinking Garrett Wilson. I'd like to see more Garrett Wilson this week. He looked pretty good last week. The Jets were kind of moving him in and out. He showed you on that one play, that one third down play where he almost converted the 3rd and 10, where he made a couple of guys miss. He showed you what he's capable of with the ball in space in his hands, because he's so effortless changing direction. He just makes guys fly past him. So maybe some manufactured touches from Garrett Wilson. We know what Elijah Moore can bring to the table. I feel like the Jets want to get the ball into Elijah Moore's hands more often than they did against Baltimore. Again, if the downfield passing game is not going to be there, there are other ways to make big plays. And it might just be manufacturing some touches in space for Elijah Moore. And then you also have Braxton Berrios, who I don't know that I'd get him the ball as much as I get it to Elijah Moore or Garrett Wilson or these running backs, but these are guys who can. He's another guy who can throw in if somebody's tired. In the screen game, if the Jets find that they're having some trouble running the ball inside because they're having offensive line issues, Hall and Carter both have pretty good hands. So these are guys who can involve in the screen game, and maybe you break a big play here or there. Because I think in general, this is going to be a game where it's going to be a battle of field position, and one or two big plays could flip field position. One or two big plays could produce a score. Now, on the other side of the ball, this was the area the Jets really struggled last week. In what was otherwise a really stellar defensive performance, the Jets did not do a good job preventing the big plays. And there were issues in particular at the safety position. LaMarcus Joyner committed a big pass interference penalty in the second quarter, setting up a touchdown. Then in the third quarter, the Jets gave up a pair of touchdowns on some ugly plays by the safeties. And I mentioned Jordan Whitehead, and I think there are two players where the perception of their play week one does not really meet the reality. One of them was Max Mitchell, who I talked about, who, as you're watching the game live, you're saying, oh, he must be doing pretty well. Then you go back and watch the film and you see it was kind of a struggle. Jordan Whitehead is the other guy. I'm not sure perception meets reality. And I said in the first segment of this show, I thought Jordan Whitehead looked really good in the early stages of this game. You saw him make a bunch of plays, and it was obvious. However, in the second half, there were issues. There were, again, 2 breakdowns that led to long touchdowns. And Jordan Whitehead had culpability in both of them. He did not read either play correctly. Now, I think you could argue Joyner had some degree of culpability on the second one, but Whitehead struggled. But here's the other issue: is Jordan Whitehead's been on the injury report this week, and it could be Will Parks, who was just re-signed, who steps into the lineup. Maybe it's the rookie, the undrafted free agent Tony Adams, but it also could be Ashton Davis. And I'm looking at this saying this is a game where you want to avoid big plays. You want to avoid giving up big plays because the other team's probably not going to be able to sustain a ton of drives. It's going to be a field position battle. Going to be seeing lots of punts, lots of teams changing possession. You want to avoid big plays. And I'm dreading the idea, if Whitehead can't go, of a safety duo of LaMarcus Joyner and Ashton Davis, because these guys, I mean, you saw what Joyner did not only last week, but also in the preseason where he was frequently in the wrong spot. You know, a guy who was supposed to be a stabilizing veteran in the back of this defense, not really performing that task very well. Then you have Ashton Davis, who last year was constantly taking himself out of position and allowing successful plays to turn into catastrophic plays for the opposition. So I think you have to be concerned with the safety position for the Jets. It was a concern entering the season, and I think the concern about it has not reduced based on what we've seen so far in week 1 and even going back to the preseason. And Jordan Whitehead playing this game would be the best thing for the Jets, but even he had some issues last week. Even he, I think, was responsible on the back end for a couple of failures that turned into touchdowns for Baltimore. So this defense is really built around, at its heart, this defense is built around preventing the big play from happening. On first and second downs, the Jets play a lot of pretty conservative coverages. Now, third down, they'll mix it up. Third down, they'll throw blitzes. They'll play man coverage, especially Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed in the mix now. But this team's got to do a better job. And this was an issue all last season. A defense that was built to prevent the big play did not do a very good job of it. And week 1, you could say a lot what the Jets did on defense was very good. They were excellent against the run. Those outside corners, I am getting more and more excited about these outside corners, Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. I mean, they were in lockdown mode. Now, Baltimore's not the toughest assignment for outside corners because they're not really that dynamic at the receiver position, but those outside corners were in lockdown mode when they were one-on-one. But the big plays, and it was at the safety position, and we know the safety position was a question mark entering the season. What will the Jets get from the safeties? It's tough to say, but they'll need the safeties to play a lot better this week because they don't have the luxury of giving up big plays. 1 or 2 big plays could change the entire game. There's something else that could change the entire game, however. That's special teams. And ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, I'll talk about the role I think special teams will have in this week 2 game between the Jets and Browns. Of course, the Jets play the Browns. Week 2 action on Sunday in Cleveland. It's a good weekend of college football action, all the other NFL Week 2 games, and you should know that BetOnline.net is your number 1 source for all of your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. And if you're still optimistic about the Jets, you have pretty good odds at BetOnline. Currently, the odds are 5-9 that the Jets will go winless in September. So if you think the Jets are going to win a game, you can put some money down on BetOnline. Or if you're less optimistic and you want Robert Saleh out, well, he's currently 6th in the most likely coach to get fired odds at 10-1. No matter what you're betting on, though, you can find all of the latest Football League developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including all the games from this weekend. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information. That includes live betting, esports, and scores. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including baseball, MMA, boxing, golf, and the NFL. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. Here on this Friday, we're talking about Jets-Browns, how the game will likely be played out, and what the Jets need to do to get a victory, get their first victory of the season, get their first September victory since 2018. It's been that long since the Jets won a September game. And I think special teams are going to play a big role in this game. And if you have not noticed the theme, I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I think it's going to be decided by a couple of plays. I don't think either quarterback's really going to produce consistency in this game, which means it could be a couple big plays. It could be field position, and special teams plays a big role in determining field position. And they just brought in a new punter this week. Braden Mann's status is unclear. Braden Mann, he played a big role in last week's game. A 20-yard punt set up the Baltimore touchdown that pretty much put the game away in the third quarter. But beyond that, the kicker position's a shaky spot for the Jets. Greg Zuerlein, we don't know what we're getting from him. A missed field goal, a missed extra point last week. Who knows what's going to happen at the kicker position? So in a game that could be low scoring, a game that could be tight, you don't want a special teams mistake. Now, on the flip side to that, the Jets do have the kick returner who was first team All-Pro last year in Braxton Berrios. And in a game where you're expecting the offense to struggle, where you're not going to see it, where you're hoping to see big plays, you're hoping to see Breece Hall break one, or Elijah Moore get the ball in space, or Garrett Wilson get the ball in space and make a big play. But in a game where you're not expecting a ton of offense, getting a short field could be key. A big Berrios return could swing things. Even if you could score a touchdown, you get a non-offensive touchdown in this game, that could be a game changer. So I think there are lots of different ways the special teams battle could play out. And you look at the Jets, there are some things to be worried about. I mean, I think both kicking spots are looking a little shaky right now. On the other hand, you do have a good return guy. Now you have Berrios. Maybe you could also break a punt return. I'm not as high on Berrios as a punt returner as I am as a kick returner, though, because I think a lot of his punt return average is kind of based on him fair catching a lot of balls that he probably should not. The last week there was a fair catch or two. I thought he had open field in front of him, and I feel like he only fair catches it unless there's like wide open field, unless he's going to break a big return. So I do feel like his punt return numbers are a little deceptive, but he did show a lot last year as a kick returner. So they can get a big play out of him. I mean, that could replace the role of offense in this game, because we know that the Jets' conventional offense, it's going to be a challenge. And part of the reason it's going to be a challenge is that the Browns know everything I just said. They know how many problems the Jets are going to have trying to throw the ball down the field in this game, which means they're going to have to run the ball a lot, which means the Cleveland will know to load the box with players. They know that the Jets are going to try and get the ball to their playmakers in space, which means they don't need to worry as much about downfield coverage. You have guys who can crowd the line because Flacco may not be able to hit them over the top. So special teams could make a big role and play a big role in determining field position, and determining field position could play a role in determining who wins the game. And of course, anything can happen. It was one thing we've learned. Maybe Flacco somehow turns back the clock. I always say this, there's somewhere in there, maybe there's a good game. I mean, I'm a little more skeptical about that statement this week than I was a week ago, but you never know what's going to happen. Maybe there's some fluky situation that happens. Maybe somebody just has the game of his life. You never know with these things. But I think most likely this is a low-scoring game. This is a game going to come down to who avoids mistakes, who makes a handful of big plays, who wins the special teams battle, who wins the field position battle. I actually think this is going to be a closer game than a lot of people do. I think the Jets do have a shot in this game with Brissett playing at quarterback for Cleveland. It could come down to just a play here or a play there. Last week, I think the same was true last week. Last week's game came down to a couple plays. Baltimore made them. The Jets did not. Can the Jets make the plays this week? That's what we'll find out. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. Big shout out to subscribers to this podcast. To join that group, just hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the channel. So does giving this episode a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the game. We'll be back next time to talk more Jets.